Hi everybody, Adam Steele from Hotpole Studios here. If you've been watching the Reaper tutorial series so far, you'll have seen us set up the basics, then talk about the effects that come with Reaper, and then we talked about routing for a while, routing of how to get your effects to go from places to other places. Now we're going to talk about third-party plugins, external plugins that you buy separately and load in that make this really come to life and become the centre of what I would consider to be a production professional platform. Okay, so the first thing that you'll need to know about external plugins just in general is that there are different types of them. If you've been using the plugins that are built into Reaper, it doesn't matter what platform you're using, whether it's Windows or Mac OS X or even Linux of some kind. The plugins that come with it are the ones that work with that exact version of Reaper. That's how they're bundled, that's how that works. If you're getting plugins separately, they need to be the right type to work with the version of Reaper that you have. This is the same with anything like Cubase on different platforms. Logic obviously is Mac OS X only, but there are certain caveats you need to know that you're getting the right version to make it work. First thing to know then is that there are different types of plugins. Plugins being the name for external effects, whether they're instruments or virtual guitar amps or just a chorus, delay, anything like that, we call them all plugins because they plug into Reaper. There are different formats of plugins that have been made by different companies though. One of the most widely used ones is VST. This is a standard that was made by Steinberg many years ago. Steinberg are the people who own and make Cubase and Nuendo. And then there are others. There's AU, which is the format that Logic uses. There's AAX, which is the format that Pro Tools uses, the modern versions of Pro Tools. And then there's DirectX, which is not really used anymore. And there's the JS format, which is only really in Reaper, so that's not really one we're going to talk about either. Generally speaking, today we're going to be looking at VSTs because as far as Reaper's concerned, they're the ones that work with it the most often. AAX won't work with Reaper, but audio units, AU, if you have them on OS X, will work with Reaper. But to be honest, if you've got the Mac VST version, I'm just going to say VST for simplicity. Next up, you have to know which format of that VST, if we're going to go with VSTs, that you need. VSTs are made specifically for Windows or for Mac OS X or even for Linux. So you obviously need to know which machine you're using. It's fairly obvious though, if you're on Windows or if you're using a Mac or if you're using Linux, you're probably going to know which one you're using. And then there's one more step beyond that, and you need to know really whether you're using a 32-bit or 64-bit system. It's quite easy to tell because if you're using Reaper and in the top bar here, it says the version number and then x64, which is what I highly recommend that you use. You're using a 64-bit system, and so you should really be using 64-bit plugins so they all just kind of talk to each other nicely and work without any problems. As far as I know, pretty much every laptop and desktop computer made in the last 10 years is a 64-bit system anyway, so it should really be using 64-bit operating systems. If it isn't, then your machine may be a little out of date at this point, and some plugins may not be made or even supported for 32-bit anymore. Knowing all this, let's dive in to actually getting some plugins and getting them working. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a virtual guitar amp. So right now with this project that I only have a few tracks. Let's hit play on this one. Okay, so it sounds cool, but I want to run that through a virtual guitar amp to really distort it. If I had a clean DI guitar, then I could get that DI guitar and run that through a virtual guitar amp. So we're going to need a virtual guitar amp. So the first thing I'm going to do is save this project, and I'm going to go to Options and Preferences. Now, at the bottom, somewhere near the bottom of Preferences is Plugins, and then there's VST in here. In VST, this top line here tells us exactly where these VST files are going to go, and we're going to need to write this down somewhere so that when we install plugins, we make sure they're going in the right place. By default, everything goes to my C drive, to the program files folder, and then to VST plugins. On some computers, the default here is program files /Steinberg /VST plugins because Steinberg made the format. I tend to delete that /Steinberg part out because I like to keep everything simple and in one folder. Then there's a semicolon here, which means kind of a also this, and then there's program files, common files, VST3. So if that's something that I didn't mention earlier, there's VST2 and VST3. Largely speaking, they work exactly the same. If you are working with a plugin manufacturer who makes VST3s, they may be more appropriate to choose to use because they're a newer format, they can be a bit more efficient on the processor, but the actual sound is identical. It's just there are some funky new features that VST3 can use, which are becoming a little bit more common now, but are largely still kind of in future development. So once we've written these down, we're going to hit OK and close Reaper down, because we need to now go and actually get some plugins from the internet, generally. So, we're going to start off with a couple of free plugins, and then we'll talk about paid plugins later on, because there is a whole world of paid extras which I swear by, but you don't have to, but it's one of those things where it becomes choice at that point. So we're going to use the Blue Cat free amp. I'm going to link this in the description below. And the reason I'm picking this one is because I know it's free and I know there's loads of different options here. So there's all the different Mac versions, all the different Windows versions. So we want Windows x64, and then there's a choice of VST or VST3. I'm going to go with just good old VST because it's stable, it's simple, it works. I'm going to click that, and that's just started downloading. And something that's really useful for us to know is that that's downloaded as an exe file. So that's got an installer. So if I click on this, it comes up with the usual licensing stuff. I hit yes. And then it guides me through an installer. I have to accept the terms of their license agreement. And then the destination folder has come up as program files, VST plugins, which is great because that means that it's going to go into the right folder so that when we open Reaper, it's going to pick that up, run with it, it's going to come up in our effect list. So we hit install. Shouldn't take very long. If you've got a solid state drive, like an SSD, well, that SSD for short, this will be a lot faster of an install than if you've got an old spinning hard drive. And I actually did a video about this particular laptop and how I upgraded it when I got it relatively inexpensively, so check that out in this link up in the corner. Anyway, that's now installed, so let's hit finish, close this down. If I bring Reaper back up, that should now load, and after going through the evaluation version stuff, which we're going to get every time until you actually purchase it. Now, if I look in my list of effects, there it is, VST BC free amp from Blue Cat Audio. It's come up in that list. So if I double click on that, that's now given me an amp. I can click the whatever mode I like, and so if the modern drive, if I crank this up, you'll really hear this really quickly. So yeah, you can hear that I've used a guitar amp on a sample, which of course you don't need to use a guitar amp on a guitar specifically. You can use it on anything you like. I quite often use them on vocals to get a really gritty distortion. Of course, I could put a clean guitar through this audience sono that I'm using and use the Blue Cat free amp. Although that does kind of defeat the object of some of the inbuilt stuff on the sono, but that's a time for another day. So That's how you'd use a guitar amp. I can just knock that effect off. Now, let's look at a VSTi, or a VST instrument. Let's say I wanted to get some drums going, because I know that's going to be important to a lot of you to have some sort of virtual drums. So, we're going to save this, close it back down again, open up Chrome again. You don't have to do this again and again and again. You can install a load of these in one go, that's fine. But I'm going to use MT Power Drum Kit. This was recommended to me a while ago, and it's really good as far as something free goes. So MT Power Drum Kit 2, let's download it for free. And so it gives us a choice here just of Windows, Mac or Linux. It doesn't give us all the other different format options. Quite a lot of the time you'll download an installer or something like that that has everything in, or it's just got one particular format. So let's click the Windows one. Now it's given us a choice, VST or AAX. We're not using Pro Tools, we're using Reaper, so we want VST. 64-bit or 32-bit, we want 64-bit, and most people will probably want 64-bit as well. Then it's going to start downloading how to install. So it gives us a nice little how-to here. So we download it, and we copy the DLL file and this PDK file, which is their own proprietary thing, into our VST plugins folder. So let's open this zip file up, and we'll see in here we've got that PDK file and that DLL file. Now we need to find our VST folder, which we wrote down somewhere. And if yours is different to mine, I hope you wrote it down like we suggested. So I'm going to my C drive, and then to Program Files, and then down to VST Plugins. So all that's in there right now is that BC free amp that we downloaded before. So let's drag and drop these two things in here. I need to provide administrator permission. Fine. Right, they're in there now. So that DLL file is the little bit that hooks into Reaper or Cubase or whatever it is that you're using, and then any other data like the drum sounds, or if you're using really big plugins, sample libraries and that kind of thing, can be installed somewhere separate. Depends on who's made the plugin and how they've made it. So let's close all this down and open Reaper one more time. There we go, MT Power Drum Kit is being loaded for the very first time there. Loading up. And it just so happens that I already loaded this up once, so let's just delete that. So the MT Power Kit, if I skip the registration, there we go. So if I just click on these now, that's cool. And then what you can do is you can add a MIDI item like we did back in episode 1 in the basics. And instead of notes being piano notes, they're now drum notes. Something I like to do as a little aside is if I go to View, Piano Roll Notes as Diamonds, which is kind of a drum mode, it looks more like drum hits rather than length of notes, because length of notes makes no sense really on a drum. And so, when I play that back, suddenly we have drums. And that'll loop and loop. And so you can then make drum loops that way. Now you've got a drum kit there, you can then do whatever it is that you need to do with your drum kit there. Now, let's look at paid plugins, because this is where it can get a little more difficult. So, save before closing? Sure. Now, if you want to use a lot of paid plugins, either they're going to come with some sort of serial number, some sort of offline activation or online activation. Some of them have custom systems that their companies make, but the ones that I tend to use the most are using a system called the iLok. This is an older one of mine, an iLok 2. This is the newer one that I got, an iLok 3, which is smaller and tougher and made of metal, which is the general reason that I bought it, because I use this a lot. And then some companies like Waves, you can actually store the licenses on a regular USB key. So that's what I do. I have these connected together so I don't lose them. And the iLok on its own won't really do much. What you need to do is buy yourself an iLok dongle, or you can use this new iLok cloud thing, but I tend to go with the old school because some of my licenses will only work with a real physical iLok. You go to iLok.com, and from here you go to the free download for their license manager, which is right here. You've got Mac OS X, Windows 32-bit or Windows 64-bit, of course, which Windows 64-bit, that's us. You download that, you get that installed, and if you don't already have an iLok account, then from the iLok website, you then sign up and get an iLok account. That's free. And from there, if you then get any plugins that need iLok licenses, you can use that email address and that sign in for the iLok website to send licenses to. So let's open up the iLok license manager, because you can do all of this without having even installed the plugin yet. So I'm going to plug in my iLok down here. There we go, and now you can see my iLok with the horrible long name has come up there. If I then sign into my iLok account, which will come up with all the details in the corner, which of course I'm going to blur out because I don't want to be giving away personal details, but yours will be right there. And for me, that comes up with a list here of all the licenses that I have, whether I've bought them, been given them, the trials, anything like that. Some of these, admittedly, I've been sent by companies because of what I do here on the channel. But any which way, they're all here. And then you can, when you've got them and you've got an iLok plugged in, you can right click on them and activate them or deactivate them as necessary to move them to different systems. And then once they're on your iLok, you then run the plugin that has that iLok activation, and it should just work. And for me, this means that I can take this iLok dongle out, plug it into the studio machine behind me there. Those same plugins just carry on working, and I don't need to have multiple licenses and pay for things multiple times. There are other licensing systems. I just wanted to mention this one specifically because it's one of the most widely used. From here, I'm going to talk about the Slate Virtual Mix Rack because it's one of my favourite, most powerful sets of paid plugins. It's got compressors, EQs, all sorts of stuff. So if I go to slatedigital.com/installers, that gives us a big list of all the Slate installers, and we just get a choice of whether it's Mac or Windows. Because this is quite a big file, it's nearly a gigabyte to download. I downloaded this ahead of time, so I'm now going to skip ahead to the downloads folder where it's already sat waiting for me. VMR Complete Bundle, Windows.zip. And this is one of those exe file ones, so I can just double click this, wait for it to install. Again, because I installed a solid state drive in here, this is going to be relatively fast. If you've got an old spinning hard drive, it may take a bit longer than this. Perfect. So this now requires a 64-bit host. By installing this new version, 32-bit support will be broken. Of course, for me, that's fine because like I was saying, everything should really be 64-bit by now. If you're on Windows or even any vaguely modern version of OS X, it's all 64-bit. We shouldn't really be using 32-bit software at this point. So I accept their agreement. All the modules at the bottom of this list, it gives us an option of whether to use AAX or VST 2 and 3. I tend to leave them all ticked, to be honest. If it gives me a choice of using AAX, if I happen to end up with Pro Tools on this machine, it will just work. Most of the file space is for all the stuff that's common to this plugin, so I'm not that bothered. And then it goes Program Files, VST Plugins, /Slate Digital. Now I'm okay with this because this is a subfolder underneath VST plugins. It actually keeps things quite nicely organized within that main folder, which means that Reaper sees it all, and it's still, if I have to go into that folder, it's nice and neat and I'm not seeing a big jumble of files. So I hit next, install, go. Just while this is installing, I'll just briefly mention that when you do buy plugins that are iLok relevant, generally they ask you for your iLok details and they send the licenses to that iLok account at that time. So that all tends to get taken care of. And then it asks us if we want to restart now, which I generally tend to say yes to restarts if there's nothing else major going on that computer. Shouldn't take too long, especially with Windows 10 and an SSD. This should be very, very quick. Okay, we're back. That wasn't too long at all. So now, if we open up Reaper, this will come up here. Yeah, Virtual Mix Rack is scanning, because it's still trying to start up Windows at the same time. I did give this quite a lot to do. There we go, so we're all loaded up. So now, we should be able to find, if I just go back to this Dark Tranquility and loop that if we add the Virtual Mix Rack, where did that go? Virtual Mix Rack. That should come up on the screen with a nice big powerful set of, there we go, virtual channel strips, EQs, all sorts of stuff. There we go, so I've got really powerful vintage EQs and all sorts of compressors and what have you that I have access to right here. And they're all paid for, and I've got all this kind of stuff. And that means that this now is basically unlocked to be a professional production machine. And so any external plugins that I want now, I can just throw on here and go, really. And I'm only limited by the power of the processor that's in this machine, which is the same can be said for pretty much any computer. Pro Tools uses their AAX version of the same kind of thing that can use mostly the same plugins. I know I can use all these Slate ones as AAX is. And so whatever platform I go to, I know that generally speaking, I can use the same tools no matter where I go, which is really quite liberating, because it means that if I prefer the use of Cubase or Reaper or Pro Tools or Logic even, I still have all the tools that I know available to me inside that, which is really quite useful. Okay, so that concludes today's tutorial on external effects and their use in Reaper. There is more to talk about, and of course, we're going to go back to routing in the next installment, because we're going to talk specifically about multi-channel routing. That is to say, generally with drum plugins, where you might want to have the kick, snare, toms, overheads, rooms, all that kind of stuff coming out of separate channels so that you can mix it all like you would with a real drum kit. So we're going to talk about all that with a paid plugin, which is why we talked about this first, in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel, because you really help us to make this a reality, and to be quite honest, you guys help us to pay for things like these plugins that I've just shown you right here. Helps us to keep the lights on and keep the world turning, and we are forever grateful. So thank you very much, and stick around for the next episode, because we're going to see you all very shortly. Cheers.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.